In today's podcast, I'm pleased to be joined by professional bettor Rob Pizzola to discuss all things relating to his experience betting on sports like NFL and the fast-developing North American gambling market. Rob, welcome to the pod. Thanks for finding the time to join me today. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on the pod.
Yep. So it's good to have you on, especially because you are somebody from a different perspective to many of my usual guests, because you're obviously coming from a North American background. So first of all, for those people not familiar with you, do you want to introduce yourself and what it is you do?
Yeah, so I'm a professional sports bettor. I've made it my living for going on a handful of years now. Wasn't all roses for me. I think I started out like many in terms of just being a recreational bettor. I worked in the sports media landscape in Canada for a while, where I was producing radio shows, eventually hosting radio and TV on the Score television network in Canada. And I built up quite a following and just kind of leveraged that following to connect with different people in sharper betting groups and kind of grew that into something that I can do full time. I'm now involved in a couple of projects, which are Betstamp, which is an app that I've invested in, and the Hammer Betting Network, which is a content platform as well. So I'm a super busy guy trying to balance my day-to-day betting with other projects that I'm working on. But it's been, I think, definitely a unique experience in my life for me to have gotten to where I'm at.
Yeah. So when you describe what you do, would you say you're a professional bettor, or how do you best describe, a dinner party, or when you meet somebody, what do you say?
It's tough depending on the crowd, because obviously I still think that there is this taboo associated with betting. Like, for example, my in-laws might not even know necessarily the extent of what I do on a day-to-day basis. And I like to keep it that way. But I just tell people that I'm a pro sports bettor. And if they ask additional questions or they're interested in more, I'm willing to share exactly how that works. But I'm an originator, really, is what it comes down to it. I don't make a living, moving bets for other people or betting on other people's behalf. I come up with numbers on the game. I send out bets to other people that they get down for me. So I approach this very much from a math and statistical perspective, and I'm not really heavily involved in the day-to-day operations.
Okay, so let's get stuck into some of that. I believe it started out at high school for you. I was doing some research, and you obviously have a love of numbers, a love of statistical modeling and that kind of thing. And I suppose betting was just a perfect fit for you.
Well, it wasn't that what drew me to betting. So what was happening is I started betting when I was in high school, exactly like you said. And it was pretty rampant in my high school. I was probably one of the last people to actually pick up betting despite my love for sports. But I started to see people talking about it and they're winning their bets. And I was thinking to myself, I watch tons of sports, more so than anyone else here. Why am I not doing this myself? And that's why I originally gravitated towards betting. Now, it took me quite a long time to realize, okay, I absolutely don't have an edge here in what I'm doing. My love for sports is not helping me profit in any sort of way. Actually, it's probably contributing to additional losses because I'm a little bit overconfident. So it did take quite a while for me to lose money through high school, through college, even a little bit out of college when I was working full time, before I started to realize, okay, I don't enjoy this anymore. I need to stop doing it. I need to figure out a way to change this. And I did study statistics and computer science in college. So naturally, I just said, there's got to be a way for me to start applying mathematics to sports rather than me just, doing the eye test. And I did a lot of research. I started reading about people who are modeling sports, so on and so forth, and just kind of started to do my own thing. And I made it a hobby. I never really had the expectation that it was going to take me somewhere. I just wanted to, at some point, be able to bet on sports again, knowing that I wasn't essentially burning money. And it took several years of me refining models and doing different things before I was ever able to validate that I have something that's worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. And was there like a specific eureka moment or realization that you had got to a point where, you could actually make it profitable?
Yeah, so I was not sophisticated in terms of any knowledge related to the betting markets about, I would say, 6 or 7 years ago. And what I was doing was posting my probabilities for baseball games to Twitter every single day. I had a large following at that time stemming from my media career. A lot of people were interested in what I had to say. So I'd post a daily, literally a copy and paste of an Excel sheet to my Twitter of this is what I would make the price in each game. This is what I'd make the total, and started to pick up some steam that way. And I did that for several months until I started having a bunch of people just reach out to me through Twitter DMs saying, hey, we're interested in working with you type of thing. And I actually dismissed a lot of them at first until I got one where someone wanted to set up a call with me. I took the call and he was basically like, you're affecting the baseball market every day. As soon as you post your numbers to Twitter, somebody's going out and betting them into the market or betting them on screen. I had no idea what this meant at the time. So I really, it was a very lengthy conversation where I had this person explain it to me. But by the end of that call, it was a validation that there's someone out there that really respects what I'm doing, so much so that they're willing to bet large amounts of money on my stuff themselves. And that was kind of the light bulb moment for me in terms of, okay, maybe I do have something here. I started working with the person that reached out to me on a free roll deal. So essentially risk free on my end, which was huge for me. I didn't have a ton of money. I couldn't afford to go down the path where I was losing a bunch of money betting again. So the idea of being able to get a fairly substantial bet for me at that time, risk free, plus the added confidence that someone believes in what I'm doing, was a huge stepping stone for me. So I honestly owe everything that I've built to social media and just being a very early adopter to Twitter and being able to grow my following, because I doubt this would have happened. I doubt I would have come to that realization. Maybe I would have, but it might have been too late by the time I did.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's really good to know. And I'm intrigued about the betting models. I hear a lot of talk. People hear speak about betting models and building algorithms. What's that look like though? How did you start to build that up? And then I guess it's a case of constant monitoring and tweaking and updating them.
For sure. So at first I was building out linear regression models for different sports, which was quite easy to do. Again, with my college background, I had all the knowledge in place to get those up and running fairly easily. Honestly, at the time that I was, first doing this, which would have been, I don't know, maybe 2014, 2015, I would say, when I really started to work on this as essentially like a second full-time job. It was such a passion of mine that I was really, really involved in on a day-to-day basis. The betting markets were a lot easier to beat than they are now. So it's very difficult now to build a linear regression model based off of team metrics and have any sort of success in any major sport. I would be inclined to say no one is able to do that nowadays. But at that time, I was able to have that success. Then over time, you kind of see your edge erode. There's a lot of things where you just kind of are forced to adapt essentially, or new data becomes available in a specific sport. So because I was passionate about what I was doing, because I always wanted to get better, because I did want to make this a primary source of income, I was definitely constantly refining models. Most of the time in the off season, sometimes in season as well, I started to build out different types of models. So I started to play around with Monte Carlo simulations for baseball, which in hindsight probably wasn't worthwhile, just added like an extra layer of complexity that I maybe didn't need. But I was constantly exploring new ways to model sports. So yeah, it's still an evolving process for me. I rarely use the same model year to year without making a few tweaks every off season.
Yeah, I assume that's always going to be the case, isn't it? Constantly to build and tweak because the market becomes more efficient. We've seen that over sport like soccer. XG, expected goals, has just started to catch on in the mainstream consciousness about a sport like that. And I believe the American sports is somewhat further ahead in terms of these metrics and how to gauge and put data into context. So what sports and markets were you betting upon? You mentioned baseball there. Is NFL another one of yours as well?
It is. So now I don't even bet baseball anymore. I can publicly say that I don't think I have an edge in baseball. Or if I do, it's so small that it's not even worth the time for me at this point. So I've kind of given up on that and modeling that. I think a lot of people in market are all doing the same thing. I think it's very different to separate yourself in a sport like baseball where, there are multiple paths where you can always model something, but I think a lot of people have realized that there's a certain path to go down and it creates essentially what I call a race to market, where a lot of people are now betting into earlier markets and then someone's trying to beat them earlier to that, and it becomes challenging. So I'm mostly focused on the NFL and the NHL right now. NHL just being, actually I would say both sports just being my personal favorites as I was growing up. I'm Canadian. I grew up on hockey. I've always wanted to be able to beat hockey from a statistical perspective. It's funny because of like the evolution in the space has been crazy in the last few years. The expected goals movement has happened in hockey as well, which has forced me to change the way that I do things. And then the NFL has always been a passion of mine as well. I don't know why I gravitated to football when I was younger, but I did. And it's always been my favorite sport. So those are the two that I'm usually fixated on over the course of the year.
Yeah, and they're quite two different ones. Because anyway, NFL is ice hockey. I don't know how many games you've got in a season. Hundreds of games, and then you've got all the playoffs. So they're very different types of markets. I presume, NFL, for example, it's high stakes and low number of bets, and the opposite applies to ice hockey. How do you target each of these sports specifically, and the markets that you're looking to bet in? I suppose as well, you're betting into quite sharp markets you can get high volume bets on.
Yeah, so I'm at the point now where I'm betting into larger limits. For the NHL, that would be the day of the game. For the NFL, it's not really any early betting on Sundays or Mondays, usually starting on Tuesday of the week. Most of the bets that I'm placing are going in Wednesday through Friday. A lot of the NFL and NHL processes are very different. NFL, I think, is very news driven. You have to really be in tune with what's going on. You have to be willing to get out ahead of market and take some calculated risks. It is definitely a smaller ROI sport. It's definitely a smaller sport in terms of volume on a weekly basis, without a doubt. There will be days in NHL where I have more bets than I will for a specific or a given week in the NFL. With that said, it's pretty easy to find liquidity for the NFL. So that's one of the inherent benefits to it. In terms of the NHL, the market, it's gotten more competitive in recent years, but there are still some pretty decent sized edges to be had. And there's what I would say is a very slow reaction to market on news relative to other sports. And also, I think there tends to be quite a drastic overreaction on news in the NHL, where I do think that there's people out there that are playing strictly news and they kind of have a list of people and say, if this person's out, then we're going to bet the other side. I don't know how accurate those people are with doing that, but I've found myself in recent years being able to run a model in real time or near real time, being able to account for any change in lineup, I think gives me a distinct advantage over everyone else that's playing in that market.
Yeah, so that must be a fair amount of work that goes in just to the modeling and obviously keeping top of the news and knowing when to enter the market. Do you do this all yourself or do you work with a team?
So essentially, I now pay someone on a day-to-day to keep on top of all this stuff because I don't really have the personal time to do it anymore.
Sure.
I tell people this all the time. I don't really love sports betting. If I could make the same income in some other field that I liked more, I probably would do that. I find it to be an extreme grind, especially those times where I've had to sit at a computer, for 14 hours a day during a season every single day. And the days that I take off, I'm always have some sort of basically something going off in the back of my head of like, what if this was the big winning day type of situation? And, I took a day off. So I've always had a high work ethic. It just eventually drains you. So
Sure.
I do have people that are on top of things now. There are some manual inputs that are required for my model, but they will run as soon as something changes. So for example, if a player were to be out in a hockey game, someone can just delete them out of a lineup for me very quickly. The model would automatically see that, rerun, spit out a new number for me. And a lot of what I do is now automated, where if a play comes into range, I'll get an alert on my phone that something's in range. I can then send out that bet. So I've really worked towards automation more so than anything in recent years, just to avoid having to sit at a computer or at a desk all day long. I think you are sacrificing a little bit of ROI when you do that. But for me, it's offset by the gains in personal sanity. So right now, I do work with another partner who is a coder. I mean, he's great. He listens to all the feedback I give. If we need to make something faster, if we need to make a model change, he can implement that stuff very quickly. We have a very good backtesting framework. And then I work with another person that's responsible for being in tune with player news on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, it makes sense. Almost you apply a cost per hour in terms of your work, and if you can pay somebody who can do some of the manual work, the heavy grind kind of stuff, it makes sense to have them doing that for you. Because I was going to ask you about the admin side of, talk about the betting if you like as well, like actual placing the bets and finding the places to bet. And I guess, you might be using people to place these bets for you. Talk to me about the act of getting your bets on.
So I don't mean this to come across as arrogant or egotistical or anything like that, but that's not really a challenge for me because there are so many people that want to work with me on the sports that I do. So I have a fairly good track record in terms of NHL, being successful at it for several years now. And whenever people find out that you're successful, you just get approached by all sorts in terms of, we'd be happy to move this for you. This is the type of bet we can give you. We can guarantee you pinnacle pricing or pinnacle minus 2 cents, stuff like that. So honestly, liquidity has not been an issue for me at any point. And because there are a lot of people willing to work with me, I can essentially negotiate very favorable deals where it would be dumb not to work with other movers rather than, like, I obviously have the option of going out and betting everything myself. But again, that's just another step in the process that I would have to account for. That can get messy. I have good partners and I'm somewhat reliant on them right now, but they also are profiting. So they want to continue in the relationship. So liquidity is not really an issue for me just because, if I stopped working with the partners that I have now who are moving games for me, I can essentially reach out to anyone in the Rolodex and I can kind of replace that overnight. So that's the honest answer.
Okay. Yeah, that's very different to what it's like across the UK and Europe. And I was going to ask you about that as well, because obviously single sports wagering was legalized in Ontario, where you live, in April this year. Is that right? And then
Yes.
It's being legalized state by state across America. Likely more states will open up in coming years. Has much changed? Or I guess a lot has changed, but has much changed for you in terms of, opportunities to bet since that change took place in April?
Personally, for me, not so much. I do have accounts at, I would say, at least 20 sports books in Ontario right now. I'd say probably upwards of 50% of those have already been limited to unit amounts or dollar amounts, I should say, that I would probably never bet into those again. So that's one of the challenges relative to offshore right now, or just still betting through PPH, is that it's substantially more difficult to get down large quantities of money with the legalized books in Ontario, which is unfortunate because I do think a lot of them have very good products and they can be amenable to more risk. But it does seem like a lot of them have taken the approach of not being amenable to any sort of risk whatsoever. So on a day-to-day, really hasn't changed things other than, for me, potentially, I might be able to, if I'm looking to bet in more of a recreational capacity, let's say, for example, where I just want to bet a game because it's on TV and I don't want to send it out to someone to move it for me, I can price shop 20 different books and I can get a very, very good number on it. But it doesn't really impact my day-to-day a whole lot.
Yeah. And you mentioned that PPH, which is, do you want to explain what that is? Because people listening might not be familiar with the PPH setup and the offshore bookmakers that, for the longest time was the only way to get bets on in a state, in places like Canada and Ontario.
Yeah, PPH stands for pay per head. Typically, there would be a master agent that would hand out a bunch of accounts to somebody. Essentially, you're settling with that agent on a weekly basis, usually, unless there's some sort of other settle limit or something like that. But I like to refer to it as your traditional Johnny Knuckles type of arrangement, where you meet the guy at the corner on a weekly basis. He hands you an envelope or you hand him an envelope. Now with the emergence of crypto, that also helps with settling as well. But it's more of what you would traditionally associate with bookmaking in North America, where it's just like a less formal process.
I see. And do you still use them much yourself or people you work with?
So yes. So again, one of the luxuries of having a large social following is people constantly reaching out to me in terms of wanting to work with me. So I do get people who reach out to me regularly with accounts that say, hey, would you be interested in betting into my account? And I'll take as many accounts as I can. And I do pass them along to partners who are able to bet into them, especially during the summer where I'm not really betting anything. There's still a lot of sports going on that can be bet through those accounts. So I still use PPHs. I don't personally hand bet into them a whole lot. It's pretty rare. However, they are part of how I make money regularly. And I do like to work with, new partners or get as many new partners as I can, because at the end of the day, these accounts that are not going to get limited instantaneously are valuable in the long run.
Yes, of course. And it almost seems like the situation in Europe and America is going full circle, because in Europe, especially in the UK, there's a lot of talk about the black market increasing because of the limitations and the restrictions that they're placing upon, people wishing to bet with licensed firms. So because people don't, they can't get on, there's affordability limits, deposit limits, effectively because bookmakers have targeted vulnerable bettors. They've pushed too far. They've taken advantage and taken as much money as possible off people who are far too vulnerable to bet the sums they have been betting, taking advantage of addiction and these kind of things. And therefore, we're seeing this pushback where the regulator or the newspapers and the government are talking about limitations. And so people like you and I, or other people who like to bet and maybe have built up a good bankroll, are finding themselves unable to bet with licensed firm, official places, because, well, they've lost £500 that month. Even though it's a drop in the ocean of your bankroll, it's just, variance taking place. Are you aware of what's taken place there in Europe? Are concerned about something similar happening in the legal market? People in Ontario and other places like that. Effectively, what happens in Europe could well play out where we are now in 10 years' time, or if not a bit sooner.
Yeah, I honestly, it's not even been a half a year yet, and we're starting to go down that path and head down that path in Ontario. I think part of the problem, and I speak to the market that I'm in, which is in Ontario, is that I don't think the regulators really have any clue what's going on, or they potentially
Sounds familiar.
Or potentially they're just turning a blind eye to it, obviously, because they're making a lot of tax revenue from these sports books in the province. However, I find it just absurd that you would have a regulatory body with nobody that actually understands sports betting who is implementing all the rules for these sports books to operate within the province. It doesn't make any logical sense to me, but we are seeing that right now. I mean, flat out, the sports books are coming out and saying, if you are a sharp bettor, we don't want your action. They're pretty much, without saying, we only want dummies, that they are coming out and saying that. And, I don't mean that as a disrespect to anyone who's a losing bettor out there, but that's essentially what the sportsbook is saying. You can play with us if you lose. If you show any sign of a pulse that you're able to win in the long run, then go find somewhere else to bet. And there's definitely an inherent problem with that. You don't see that anywhere else, essentially. Like any other service that's offered out there, it's extremely rare that someone would say, oh, you can do this, Rob, but Peter, you're not welcome to do this. I find it just honestly a little bit sickening, especially knowing how certain players are being targeted right now. I see my friends going down the path with all the reload offers, and pretty quickly these sportsbooks can dictate, within 10 bets, whether or not you're going to be a profitable player to them in the long run. And you can really see them honing in on the ones that will be profitable to the sportsbook in the long run, which I understand. They're running a business. I don't necessarily put it completely on them, but at the regulatory level, I just wonder if anyone even knows what's going on. And my guess would be they're just completely oblivious to it.
Yeah, they're either oblivious or just not experienced enough. And that's certainly been the complaint, and what a lot of people believe, especially in the UK, the regulator there, they're either, I'm going to choose my words carefully, they're either being ignorant or willfully being ignorant, if you like, turning a blind eye because of the influence of bookmakers and a little bit of vested interests, perhaps. And it's such a shame because you've got markets, for example, very liquid markets like the NFL markets and other sports which attract a lot of money. And we see with examples like Pinnacle, if you're sharp enough and if you build a good trading team, it is possible to turn a profit in some of these markets. There needs to be a little bit more joined up thinking where it comes to, okay, maybe we can't take too much action on some of the, you talked about some of the early markets that people, it's like a race, to get on as soon as you can. You understand they might limit on that, but surely some of these markets where you've got huge sums of money being bet into them, there is opportunity to trade with all types of punters.
Yes. And what really bothers me is that sportsbooks are very much aware that they basically, even though this is a regulated market, they can essentially operate like it's the wild, wild west. And you see all sorts of what I would term to be extremely shady things that are even happening with regulated operators now. Like, for example, you go to put in a live bet and, the bet takes a minute to process, and then they completely move the line on you, but still accept the wager. There's nowhere in the world where that should be acceptable, right? If I like a bet at minus 110 and I'm placing that bet at minus 110, don't accept the wager at minus 120 without at least giving me the option. But, the fact that there's nowhere on any of these regulated sites that would dictate to the user what they can even bet on the game. I have no idea going in how much I can possibly even bet on a single game because there's no limits. There's no max risk button. There's nothing there. So you essentially create an environment in which the sportsbook can now do whatever they want. and there's no punishment. They're not going to face any consequences for this because no one is essentially paying attention. So I think it's just a horrible culture right now and what's happening. Again, I do understand that sportsbooks are running businesses. They're in the business of making money. A lot of these books, have shareholders, board of directors. They have to report a certain number of earnings. I get it. It's a business. It should be on the regulatory board to hold them accountable in terms of what they can or can't do. But not even having limits on the site, I think, is inexcusable. Moving lines on people, like this is just, it's absolutely shady, right? This shouldn't be allowed anywhere in the world.
No, like you talk there about moving the line. Often you'll see a button that says, do not accept a worse price. And you can click that button, put a tick in that box, and it won't, if the line does move, you don't take that bet unless you get prompted to do so. But I agree, yes, there needs to be much better oversight, because ultimately, if without that, what you create is the culture where we've got in other countries where betting is so much more mature, where you see not just issues for people like you and I, and people that bet and bet sharp, because I don't think with the people I speak to either, especially some of the professionals, they say, well, we're not expecting bookmakers to provide me a lifestyle, provide me an income. I expect there's going to be a battle, and I have to be creative, and I have to work out ways to get on. Obviously, I'm not going to bet in your own name, but there has to be a bit of a balance. So it'll be interesting to see what unfolds if any changes do take place, because I believe there is some attempt, at least in Ontario, for some people to actually raise these issues and see if the regulator or the authorities are interested in listening and doing something. Are you aware of any appetite from the conversations that you have?
I'm not. I know that a friend of mine, New Jersey-based Captain Jack Andrews, did try something like this in New Jersey, and it kind of fell on deaf ears, which is kind of demoralizing for anyone that wants to go about it. I've thought about this, to be completely honest with you, Peter. I just don't have the time. Like, the amount of effort that would take to force a change in this space right now, I think would be monumental. And I have 2 side projects plus my own personal betting. I just cannot take something else on personally, or else I'd love to be the advocate for change. But I think it's just an uphill battle. I think whoever does decide to go down that path, it is going to be extremely time consuming, and I don't know that they'll get anywhere. That's not to say it's not worth pursuing, obviously. But right now, I am still able to get bets filled very comfortably. Would I love to be able to just fill all my wagers in the regulated market? Absolutely. If I could do that, I would 100% take that opportunity and do that. But it just seems like it's not viable at any time in the near future. And any concerns that have been raised so far just fall on deaf ears.
It's such a shame. It's such a shame. But let's change gears a little bit. Let's talk about Betstamp. You mentioned them at the top of the podcast there. It's a really good resource. You've got like handicapper tracking. You're able to look at different odds and lines, what we'd call an odds comparison site across Europe. And it's the equivalent of that for the North American market. What's been the response and take up on the platform? Are you finding people that, are they aware of the fact that they can compare lines, they can compare odds, or are they still wedded to the fact that, I bet with this firm and that's what I always do because it's convenient?
So I think people are aware of it now. I will say the process to educate users has been challenging, but we're starting to make progress. I think just most recreational bettors, it's very difficult for them to understand why they would need to line shop. I see this day to day with my friends. I watch NFL Sunday with my friends every week, and they're still betting through one sports book, and they really can't process why they should at least open up 3 to 5 books, more than that if they can, and always find the best available number. They don't get it. And I think there's like a big educational barrier right now, because there's so many people that are entering this market, especially in Ontario, that haven't bet before, purely recreational. They're trying out one sports book. They want to get acclimated to it, and they're just doing themselves a disservice. So I think the biggest challenge in an app like Betstamp and growing it has been the educational component. With that said, we are getting somewhere now. There's a lot of scenarios in people's day-to-day lives where they're extremely price sensitive, whether they're doing some shopping online or at the grocery store or picking what gas station they're going to go to or whatever. And when you can just relay the fact that this is just an extension of their day-to-day price sensitivity, they kind of start to process it and they kind of start to get it. So we are definitely seeing an uplift in recent months. Obviously, a lot of that has to do with football being back as well. But in terms of pure line shopping, we can see how people interact with the app on a day-to-day. We are seeing a lot of people that are going through specific lines, specific games, scrolling through, especially on player props, even to find the best available prop price on something that they like. So definitely, I think the educational campaigns that we've put into place are finally starting to pay off. But I won't lie to you, it was an extreme challenge for a year to really hit home. And it took like a few times with certain people before they actually started to grasp the concept. And I'm glad that they did, but it just goes to show that, education in this space is extremely important.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I've had conversations with people before and they're not even aware of these kind of websites. And even though sometimes they advertise on TV, especially across Europe, they advertise on TV, or they're advertising in various locations and media partners for some big companies. And one of the other things you do actually at Betstamp is what we do at the Smart Betting Club. We look at tipsters or handicappers, as you might call them, and track their performance. Have you found some good experts through the Betstamp and platform? And I guess as well, you've been able to track some that perhaps don't quite perform as strongly as they claim to?
Oh yeah, for sure. A couple of the people that I work with for other sports, I found directly through Betstamp, not doing anything that any other user could not do. It's not me searching through the back end or the API or anything like that to find people. It was literally just using our platform to find winning bettors in sports, analyzing their bet history, seeing if they were betting into markets where the number was widely available, what their closing line value was. So I've personally used it for my own gain as well. And I'm already a professional bettor. So for me, it's been helpful in building relationships with new people. Definitely, that's one of the ways that I think a lot of people are looking for the easy way to bet, which is I don't want to put in work on a daily basis. I don't have the time to put in the work to handicap a game. Or frankly, I'm just not good enough to win on my own. So let me find someone else where I can tail their picks. I think that's a extremely high use case in this day and age. And luckily, I think the one thing that's great about our app is we do keep a verified record for anyone that's posting picks within the app, meaning that once somebody tracks a play within our app, let's say just a random game at DraftKings, what our application will do is go to DraftKings at that exact time, make sure that number actually exists. If it did, we mark it as a verified play. If it does not exist at the time of posting, we do not mark it as verified. We do not count it into a public record. It will still display within someone's profile, but it's not part of their verified record. So it allows for the user who's seeking out good bets to avoid being misled by marketing tactics or being scammed in any capacity. So I think that's where we try to differentiate ourselves in market is through the pick verification.
Mm-hmm. And do you find there are a lot of scams in the North American side of things? Because I watched the Action Network and I saw one of the early kind of introductions to it was Vegas Dave and people like him. And it seems people perhaps are willing. Maybe it's that lack of education and the fact that it was perhaps previously not legalized and not widespread. But it seemed from the outside looking in anyway, there's a lot more scams, people willing to pay a lot more money, even just for one or two picks from a handicap. And they might pay a couple $100 for their lock, as they might call it, for a particular game. Is that your impression of the market? Is it quite highly priced and a lot of pirates, if you will?
Absolutely. I would be lying to you if I didn't say that I'm motivated by competing against the Action Network on a daily basis, because part of why I wanted to be part of Betstamp here is having been an Action Network user before and subscribing to different people's plays and noticing that they would be pass posting, for example. We're talking about big personalities that work for Action Network who are sending out lines that have already steamed and no longer exist. Just to pad their records. And I think there's something fundamentally wrong with that, right? I think what's completely lacking in this space is transparency. Like we know through industry studies that upwards of 98% of people are going to lose at sports betting in the long run, but everybody wants to claim that they're a winner. And I think it's okay to say that I lose at sports betting, or I'm not good at this, I'm not good at that. I don't know why, for some reason or another, I mean, it has to be ego related, where people are just unwilling to admit that they don't have an edge or that they're a losing bettor in a certain thing. And I think that there's definitely a need for more transparency. This space is just filled with scam artists, whether that's people selling picks, again, preying on others just through marketing tactics, using short-term sample sizes, not even posting a bet history to their sites. How many touts can you go to their website in the space and actually look at a verified pick history of any one of those? Some of them don't even have an unverified pick history. And the reality is there are a lot of people out there that are looking to have the work done for them. They are willing to pay a service to pick games for them. They don't understand that they'd probably just be better off coin flipping themselves than paying another coin flipper on top of it. But they're just not seasoned enough to recognize that. And I was in that boat at one point in my life as well. When I was in my early 20s, I used to subscribe to picks. I didn't know any better. So there's a lot of vulnerable people out there. And as long as there's going to be people that are willing to take advantage of them.
Yeah, that's, well, it's certainly an area I'm looking into. And I think Betstamp's a really good resource. Even if you, someone who lives in North America and you're not interested in picks, just go and use it to find the best prices and find the best lines, as you say. And I think it's a really good resource. And another resource that you've launched quite recently is The Hammer, which is content. Tell me about that and the goal behind the website.
I've been consuming sports betting content for a long time. I consume mostly sharper betting content, things where I might learn from someone else. I'm not too heavily involved with, more of the entertaining, recreational type of content. However, I am noticing that there's a huge market for that. So a few months ago, I'd say about 3 months ago, I was just going through all sorts of content networks in the betting space, and I couldn't really find someone or some sort of content network that is catered to all types of bettors, whether you are a sharp or whether you're just an average Joe or whatever. It seemed to be like a gap in market for somebody who's creating content that is inclusive of everybody. So that was the whole goal behind building The Hammer. Again, I think it's completely okay for a losing bettor to produce content that other people are consuming, provided that they're not misrepresenting themselves as a winning bettor or a professional. I think as long as people are real with the audience, it's completely okay. So that's what we've tried to build with The Hammer here, is a large assortment of sharp betting content, recreational content, lifestyle content, essentially a platform or a hub where any type of bettor can go to it on any given day of the week and find something of value to them and know that they're not going to be completely misled by someone claiming to be what they're not. For every single creator we have on The Hammer, we track all the picks that they give out on the platform on Betstamp. So those are all verified. Every single show is tracked on Betstamp. So we're trying to do this in a way where people don't feel misled. We don't have creators misrepresenting themselves. And ultimately, trying to grow a sense of community amongst people where they can feel included, even if they don't understand a sharp betting concept or they don't want to consume recreational content or whatever. So the vision around it was an all-inclusive betting network where people are real with the audience.
Yeah, because the conflict of interest that I find with some sites, especially the free content sites, is that they are trying to appeal to people as a sharp betting site, but yet they are perhaps owned or run by bookmakers who clearly don't want sharp action. So there's that conflict there, and consumers aren't always aware of that. So what's the plan for The Hammer then? Is that to stay free forever? Are you going to charge a subscription fee? What's the outline and the vision for the website?
I can't say long-term plans in terms of monetization because we've been live for less than 2 weeks. We're trying to grow as much as possible. Immediately, we are monetizing through advertisements. So that could be advertisements from sportsbooks who want to sponsor specific shows. We've made it very clear that we're still going to line shop wherever we can, but we will take sportsbook advertisements. We also will just take regular advertisements from some lifestyle companies that may not necessarily even be in the sports realm or whatever, but we are monetizing through ads. We are not charging a subscription fee. We're not affiliating to sportsbooks right now or anything like that. Long term, anything can change. Obviously, you have to adapt to how your business is performing. You have to take a look at the data, and that will guide decisions down the road. But our plan is to keep this free for as long as possible, if not forever, and right now monetize through ads.
Oh, that sounds really good. There's that mix of entertainment and education. And then obviously the fact that you're tracking your performance through Betstamp and being very transparent, I think that sets a really good standard. And it's something that a lot of other content providers could certainly learn about and learn from. You're on The Hammer, aren't you? You are on so many podcasts and so many shows at the moment. Rob, do you want to give an outline of where people can catch you and find you at the moment, talking about betting and what you do?
For sure. So I love to produce content. I started in the content space. I've always liked having my voice heard as much as like that, again, sounds arrogant or egotistical. I just, that's the way I grew up. So I like to do as much content as possible without, completely ruining my edge. So I do a lot of late week stuff for NFL, but now I do have a new podcast, which goes up Monday mornings called Forward Progress. That's available at the Hammer. And essentially, I just react to the previous week of NFL and I look forward to the upcoming week. If you do go to hammer.bet, anyone who wants to check it out, there's a section called Creators on the left-hand side of the screen. Whether you're on mobile or whether you are on desktop, every single creator on the site has a page there, including myself. If you were to click into any single of the creator profiles, you would see all the shows that they're on, all the past videos they've been involved with. So anyone who wants to see my stuff specifically, you can head over to the hammer.bet, go to the creator section, click on Rob Pizzola, and I do have a ton of content, including some live video content for Sunday Night Football and Monday Night Football every week.
Yeah, it's really good stuff. I'd encourage people to go check out. I listened to your Circles Off podcast. Now you do that on Betstamp. I don't know if you mentioned that there. And there's some really good content out there, especially for somebody if you're interested in learning about the US markets and some of the sports that we talked about today, whether NFL, NHL. There's some really good content there. And I'll put the links for these shows in the show notes. But you're also on Twitter, aren't you, Rob? I think your DMs, you keep them open at the moment.
I do. I've always kept my DMs open. It might take me a few days to get back to everyone, but I do pride myself on responding to everyone no matter what. So if you ever have a sports betting related question, maybe you're scared to air it in public, or if you want to compliment me on a show, if you want to tell me I think you should change this or whatever, my DMs are always open on my Twitter account at Rob Pizzola. You can message me at any time through there and I will get back to you.
Yeah, well, that's great to have you on, Rob. Thank you ever so much for your time. I encourage people to go check out the Betstamp platform. Go look at some of the content on the Hammer, and I wish you all the best with your betting and the progress of both websites, Rob.
I appreciate that. Thanks for having me, Peter.